The biting wind tore through the city streets, cutting through Jake's thin jacket as if it wasn't even there. Shivering, he trudged along the familiar paths of Central Park, his head bowed low to shield himself from the cold. His shoes, scuffed and worn from endless miles of wandering, crunched softly against the frosty gravel. The early morning air carried a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds or the rustle of wind through barren branches. For Jake, Central Park was more than just a place. It was a refuge. Here, surrounded by trees and benches, he could escape the unkind glares and pitying stares of strangers who passed him by. It was a place where he could fade into the background and pretend, even if just for a moment, that his world wasn't defined by struggle. His stomach growled, the dull ache of hunger gnawing at him like an old enemy. It wasn't unusual. Jake had learned to live with it. He tightened his grip on his tattered backpack, a bag that held everything he owned in the world, and pressed forward. He didn't know what this day would bring, but he could never have imagined how it would unfold. For Jake, survival was a daily game, one he had become well-practiced in playing. Every moment was a calculated effort to outsmart hunger, cold, and despair. As he walked through Central Park, his eyes scanned the ground with the precision of someone who had learned to find value in the smallest of things: a forgotten coin, a half-eaten sandwich, or anything that could sustain him for another day. But today, his search revealed something far beyond what he ever expected. Underneath a bench, nestled against the gravel, was a sleek black leather wallet. Jake's pulse quickened as he bent down to pick it up, his fingers trembling slightly in the frosty morning air. It was heavier than he expected, and the weight immediately told him it wasn't empty. He glanced around. The park was almost deserted, save for a jogger in the distance who didn't so much as glance his way. Jake hesitated for a moment before cautiously opening the wallet. What he saw made his breath hitch: a stack of crisp $100 bills, neatly folded and tucked into one compartment. There were credit cards too, along with an ID card. As Jake pulled the ID into view, his eyes widened. The face on the card looked vaguely familiar, but it was the name that made his heart pound. For a long moment, Jake just stared at the wallet, as if expecting the name to change or the wallet to disappear entirely. A storm of thoughts raced through his mind, each one louder than the last. The money could change everything. It could buy him meals for weeks, maybe months. He could get new clothes, clean himself up, even rent a small room to stay warm. For the first time in years, he could stop merely surviving and start building a life. But then, like a faint echo, a quieter voice pushed through the noise. It was his mother's voice. From a time when life wasn't as hard, he could almost hear her saying, "Always do the right thing, Jake, no matter how hard it is." Jake clenched his jaw, torn between the overwhelming temptation and the principles his mother had instilled in him long ago. He glanced at the money one last time, his hands trembling as he snapped the wallet shut. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he made his decision. What he chose to do next would not only define his character but set into motion a series of events he could never have imagined. Jake's heart pounded as he approached a nearby park officer. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly, holding out the wallet. "I found this under a bench. It belongs to, well, you can see who it belongs to." The officer raised an eyebrow and took the wallet, flipping it open to inspect the contents. When his eyes landed on the ID, his expression shifted. "Donald Trump." "Huh," he muttered, giving Jake a curious look. "You sure you want to hand this over? There's a lot of cash in here." Jake nodded firmly, though his stomach twisted at the thought of what he was giving up. "It's not mine," he said simply. "I just wanted to make sure it gets back to the owner." The officer studied him for a moment before nodding. "You did the right thing, kid. I'll make sure this gets to the right place." He scribbled down Jake's name and an old phone number Jake rarely used but hoped still worked. Then, with a slight nod, he sent Jake on his way. As Jake walked back through the park, his emotions churned. A part of him felt foolish for giving up what could have been a lifeline, but another part felt a quiet pride. He had nothing, yet he had chosen to do the right thing. Jake spent the rest of the day wandering the park. His stomach growled louder with every passing hour, but he tried to push the wallet from his mind. Still, Trump's name lingered in his thoughts. He didn't expect anything in return. He wasn't naive enough to think someone rich and powerful would care about a nobody like him. Yet, deep down, a tiny flicker of hope refused to be extinguished. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Jake sat on the cold steps of the park. He stared out at the bustling world around him, unaware that his life was about to take a turn he never saw coming. The next morning, Jake woke to the familiar chill of the park bench he'd claimed as his sleeping spot. The city around him was already alive with its usual morning chaos: honking cars, cooing pigeons, and joggers pounding along the pathways. Jake pulled his threadbare jacket tighter, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that had become his constant companion. The previous day's events felt like a distant memory, almost like a dream. Still, a small part of him wondered if returning the wallet had made any difference at all. Jake sat on the cold stone steps near the park's entrance, trying to savor a rare patch of sunlight on his face. The biting chill of the morning lingered in the air, and his threadbare jacket did little to keep him warm. He watched the usual scene unfold around him: joggers pounding along the pathways, bundled-up dog walkers chatting, and pigeons pecking at crumbs. It was just another day, another endless routine of trying to get by. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed someone approaching. Unlike the usual crowd of casual parkgoers, this man stood out. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, his polished shoes clicking purposefully against the pavement. His stride was confident, deliberate, and his eyes locked on Jake with an intensity that made him sit up a little straighter. Jake's heart started to pound. Was this someone from the park security? Had he done something wrong? The man stopped directly in front of him, his imposing figure blocking the sunlight. "Are you Jake?" the man asked, his voice calm but carrying an air of authority. Jake blinked, unsure of how to respond. Yeah," he said cautiously, his voice tinged with both suspicion and curiosity. The man didn't react right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and sleek: a business card. He held it out toward Jake, who hesitated before cautiously taking it. As Jake's fingers wrapped around the card, his eyes widened. It wasn't just any card. The gold-embossed letters gleamed in the light. Reading, "Trump Organization. Mr. Trump would like to meet you," the man continued, his tone still professional but softening slightly. "He was very impressed by your honesty in returning his wallet. Can you come to Trump Tower this afternoon?" Jake's jaw nearly hit the ground. His first instinct was disbelief. This had to be a mistake, or maybe even a prank. "Wait, what?" he stammered, staring at the card in his hand as though it might disappear at any moment. "You heard me," the man said with a faint smile. "Mr. Trump would like to thank you personally. A car will be waiting for you at noon to take you to Trump Tower." For a moment, Jake was completely stunned. His mind raced with questions. Was this real? Why would Donald Trump, one of the richest, most influential people in the world, care about a homeless kid who had just happened to find his wallet? This had to be some kind of joke, right? "But why me?" Jake managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression softened further. "Because what you did mattered," he said simply. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did. You proved that honesty still exists in this world, even in the hardest of circumstances." Jake stared at him, unsure of what to say. His fingers tightened around the card, his emotions swirling between disbelief, excitement, and anxiety. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the man replied with a slight nod. "Just be ready at noon. The driver will find you." With that, the man turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he disappeared into the bustling park. Jake was left sitting on the cold steps, his mind reeling. He stared down at the business card in his hand, its golden letters shimmering like some kind of dream. He'd spent so long being invisible, blending into the background of a city that barely noticed him. Now, out of nowhere, one small act of honesty had brought him into the orbit of one of the most powerful men in the world. A swirl of doubt crept in. Could this really be happening? What if it was some kind of scam? But another voice inside him, the same voice that had pushed him to return the wallet in the first place, urged him to take the chance. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt something stir in him: hope. He glanced at the card again, the name, Trump Organization, gleaming in the sunlight. Whatever was about to happen, one thing was certain: his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The rest of the morning was a whirlwind for Jake. He stopped by a local shelter, borrowing a cleaner shirt and giving himself a quick once-over in the cracked mirror. His hair was combed back with his fingers, though the effort only partially tamed it. Every step toward the unknown felt heavier than the last, and his thoughts churned as he tried to prepare himself for what felt like stepping into another universe. By the time Jake arrived at Trump Tower, his nerves were raw. The building loomed over him, its gleaming glass exterior catching the afternoon sun and reflecting it like a beacon. The revolving doors spun with an air of significance, and Jake hesitated, staring up at the towering structure. Was he really about to walk into this world? Taking a deep breath, he pushed forward, stepping inside. The lobby was dazzling, a scene straight out of a movie. Marble floors stretched out beneath him, polished to such perfection that they reflected the towering gold accents gleaming on every surface. The faint scent of fresh flowers mingled with an intangible sense of wealth and power. Jake immediately felt out of place, his scuffed shoes and thrift store clothes glaringly out of sync with the opulence around him. He made his way to the front desk, where a receptionist greeted him with a practiced smile. Impeccably dressed in black, she exuded professionalism. "You must be Jake," she said warmly, glancing at her computer screen. "Mr. Trump is expecting you." Before Jake could fully process what was happening, he was led to a private elevator. The doors closed with a smooth hiss, and the elevator began its ascent, climbing higher and higher. His ears popped slightly as the numbers on the panel ticked upward. He gripped the railing, feeling the weight of every floor beneath him. When the elevator finally came to a stop and the doors slid open, Jake found himself in a breathtaking office suite. The space radiated power and success. The walls were adorned with photographs of Donald Trump shaking hands with world leaders, celebrities, and dignitaries. Awards and accolades were displayed prominently, each one a testament to the man's larger-than-life persona. Jake stood frozen, taking it all in, unsure where to look first. The sound of footsteps broke through his awe. Donald Trump himself entered the room, exuding an effortless confidence that seemed to command the very air around him. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, complete with his signature red tie. As he approached, he extended a hand toward Jake, his demeanor a mix of authority and warmth. "You're the young man who found my wallet," Trump said, his voice deep and commanding but carrying a note of genuine curiosity. Jake quickly extended his hand, gripping Trump's as firmly as he could manage despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to make sure it got back to you." Trump's lips curled into a small smile, and his eyes sparkled with amusement. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did," he said, his tone carrying weight. "It takes character to do the right thing when no one's watching." He motioned toward a pair of plush leather chairs near his desk. Jake hesitated for a moment before sitting, sinking into the kind of comfort he'd only ever dreamed of. Trump took a seat across from him, leaning back slightly and steepling his fingers. "Tell me about yourself, Jake," Trump said, his piercing gaze fixed on him. "What brought you to that bench in Central Park?" Jake hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his life. But there was something about Trump's steady gaze and genuine curiosity that made him feel oddly comfortable. Taking a deep breath, he began to share. He spoke of his mother's unwavering dedication to raising him, the unfortunate twists of fate that had left them homeless, and the challenges he faced every day just trying to survive. His voice wavered at times, but Trump never interrupted. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When Jake finished, there was a pause. Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. "You've been dealt a tough hand," he said, his tone steady but laced with a sincerity Jake hadn't expected. "But you've got something money can't buy: integrity. I respect that, and I believe in rewarding it." Jake blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Was Donald Trump, a man with a reputation for ruthless business dealings, really saying this to him? Trump's voice took on a more deliberate tone as he continued. "I'd like to help you, Jake. You've got potential, and I think we can do something about your situation. What do you say?" For a moment, Jake could only stare, his mind reeling. He had walked into Trump Tower with no expectations beyond possibly hearing a simple thank you. Yet here he was, being offered something he hadn't dared to dream about: a lifeline, an opportunity. I don't know what to say," Jake stammered, his voice cracking with a mix of disbelief and emotion. Trump smiled warmly, leaning back in his chair. "Say yes. The rest? We'll figure it out." Jake's chest tightened as a surge of emotions washed over him: gratitude, hope, and a cautious optimism he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," he said softly, his voice gaining strength as he repeated it. "Yes. Thank you, Mr. Trump." Trump nodded, his expression firm. "Good choice. Let's get to work." And with that, Jake's life took a turn he could never have imagined, setting him on a path filled with opportunity, challenges, and the chance to rewrite his story. He could hardly believe his eyes as he stood in the doorway of his new apartment, modest yet cozy, The space felt like a palace compared to the cold, hard benches of Central Park. The apartment had everything he could have dreamed of: a warm bed with crisp, clean sheets, a small but well-furnished living room, and a kitchen stocked with fresh food. For the first time in years, Jake felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: safety. Donald Trump had been true to his word. Not only had he secured a home for Jake, but he had also done something even more extraordinary. He reached out to Jake's mother, who had been living in a nearby shelter. With Trump's help, she now had a steady job as a housekeeper at one of his luxury hotels. Their reunion was emotional, a moment Jake would carry with him forever. As his mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "You did this. You brought us back together." Her voice trembled with gratitude, and Jake could feel the weight of her words. It was both a comfort and a reminder of the enormous opportunity he had been given. Adjusting to his new life wasn't easy. Jake wasn't used to having a home, let alone the simple comforts others might take for granted. The warm shower felt like a luxury, and the quiet hum of the heater was a constant reminder that he no longer had to brace himself against the cold. He spent the first few days exploring every corner of the apartment, marveling at its features. He opened and closed the refrigerator multiple times, astonished that it was stocked with fresh food he didn't have to scavenge for. The bed, with its soft blankets, felt like sinking into a cloud. That first night, Jake slept for 12 hours straight, wrapped in a cocoon of warmth and security. This newfound stability gave Jake a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. He knew he had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild not only his life but his mother's as well. He was determined not to waste it. With every step forward, Jake reminded himself of where he had been and where he was headed, fueled by the belief that doing the right thing had brought him here. But as the days passed, Jake realized that this new chapter came with its own set of challenges. The first and most daunting was school. Trump had arranged for Jake to attend a private academy, covering all expenses, including uniforms, supplies, and even tutoring if needed. On his first day, Jake felt like a fish out of water. The academy was a world apart from anything he'd ever known. The other students, dressed in neatly pressed uniforms, whispered behind his back, their curious eyes following him through the halls. The scruffy boy who had suddenly appeared in their midst was a mystery, and Jake could feel their judgment in every lingering stare. At lunch, he sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria, trying to eat quietly and keep to himself. The buzz of conversation around him felt louder than usual, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was the topic of discussion. Just as he was about to leave, a boy approached him, his expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Hey, you're the kid Trump helped out, right?" the boy asked, his tone more curious than mocking. Jake froze for a moment, then nodded cautiously. "Yeah, that's me," he said, unsure of what to expect. The boy grinned. "That's cool. Not everyone gets a second chance like that. You must have done something pretty big for him to notice you." Jake shrugged, feeling the weight of the other students' eyes on him. "I just returned his wallet," he said quietly, not wanting to make a big deal of it. The boy laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Well, I guess honesty pays off. Welcome to the school, man." Jake managed a small smile as the boy walked away. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Despite the awkward beginning, Jake began to find his footing. He threw himself into his studies with a determination that surprised even him. He stayed up late reading textbooks and completing assignments, motivated by the thought of how far he'd come. The classes were challenging, and the workload often overwhelming. But Jake refused to give up. Trump's words echoed in his mind. "You've got potential, Jake. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For the first time in his life, Jake had the tools and support he needed to succeed, and he wasn't about to let them go to waste. His relationship with his mother, which had endured the trials of their difficult past, grew even stronger in this new chapter of their lives. Evenings in their modest apartment became a cherished routine, sharing meals, trading stories about their days, and rediscovering the bond that had kept them afloat through the darkest times. "You're a good kid, Jake," his mother said one evening as they sat together on their worn but cozy couch. Her eyes shimmered with pride and warmth. "And now, you've got a chance to do something great. Don't waste it." Those words stayed with Jake as the weeks turned into months. Slowly but surely, his confidence blossomed. No longer did he feel like the boy wandering the paths of Central Park, scrounging for scraps. He was becoming someone with a future, a young man who was building something meaningful. At school, Jake began to thrive. He earned the respect of his teachers and even made a small group of friends who valued his honesty and resilience. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was creating a life. At home, he and his mother worked together to make their apartment truly theirs. Second-hand furniture was arranged with care. Framed photographs adorned the walls, and laughter filled the space that once felt foreign. For the first time, Jake felt like he belonged, not just in the apartment, but in this new life. Still, Jake knew this was just the beginning. Trump's generosity had given him a foundation, but what he built on it would be up to him. He resolved to make the most of every opportunity, not just for himself, but for his mother and everyone who had ever believed in him. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt like his life was his own, and he was ready to embrace it. One brisk afternoon, Jake arrived at Trump Tower, the now familiar golden facade gleaming in the sunlight. The revolving doors, once a symbol of intimidation, now felt like an entryway to possibilities. The grandiose lobby, with its marble floors and glittering chandeliers, had started to feel less overwhelming and more like a place where Jake belonged, or at least, where he was beginning to belong. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Trump is expecting you," she said, gesturing toward the private elevator. As Jake ascended, the quiet hum of the elevator reminded him of how drastically his life had changed in just a few short months. When the doors opened, he stepped into Trump's office, the familiar space still as imposing and impressive as ever. The walls were adorned with photographs of Trump shaking hands with world leaders and celebrities, alongside awards that gleamed under the soft lighting. Trump was already seated at his desk, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up when Jake entered, his expression brightening. "Jake, good to see you," he said, motioning for him to take a seat. Jake sat down, his nerves tingling with anticipation. "How's the new apartment treating you?" Trump asked, leaning back in his chair. Jake couldn't help but smile. "It's amazing, sir. I still can't believe it's real." Trump chuckled. "Good. You deserve it. But I didn't bring you here to talk about your apartment." His tone shifted, becoming more serious as he leaned forward. "I've been thinking about you, Jake. You're a bright kid with integrity, qualities that are rare these days, and I want to give you a chance to make the most of them." Jake shifted in his seat, uncertain of what Trump might say next. The man had already changed his life in unimaginable ways. What more could he possibly offer? "I'm offering you a lifetime pass to my private events," Trump said, his tone direct but inviting. "Galas, fundraisers, business seminars, you name it. You'll be in the room with some of the most influential people in the world. These are the kinds of connections that can open doors you didn't even know existed." Jake stared at Trump, trying to process what he just heard. The offer was more than generous. It was life-altering. "What do you think?" Trump asked, his gaze steady. Jake blinked, momentarily speechless. "You mean I'd be able to meet people like you, learn from them?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Exactly," Trump replied with a nod. "But this isn't just about mingling. I want you to learn. Pay attention to how deals are made, how people interact, and how opportunities are created. You've got the character, Jake. Now it's time to build the skills." Jake's mind raced. The offer was beyond anything he could have imagined. Growing up, the idea of meeting powerful people, let alone learning from them, had seemed like a fantasy. Yet here it was, a chance not just to change his life, but to shape his future in ways he had never dreamed possible. I don't know what to say." Jake stammered. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." Trump smiled, a knowing gleam in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Jake. Just make the most of it. And remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. Use them wisely." The first event came sooner than Jake had expected. A charity gala held in the grand ballroom of one of Trump's luxury hotels. The room was dazzling, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests. Jake felt out of place in his rented suit, but Trump had assured him he belonged there. "Confidence is key," Trump had told him. "Walk in like you own the room." Jake did his best to follow that advice, though his heart pounded as he stepped into the crowd. The sheer opulence of the room was overwhelming. Waiters glided past with trays of champagne, and conversations buzzed around him, filled with unfamiliar terms like equity, ROI, and portfolio diversification. Jake felt like an outsider, but as he listened and observed, he noticed something surprising. These people weren't all that different from him. They had dreams, ambitions, and, in some cases, a lot of luck. As the evening wore on, Jake began to relax. He introduced himself to a few guests, feeling his confidence grow with each handshake. Some dismissed him quickly, but others were intrigued by his story. One woman, a philanthropist with a passion for youth initiatives, leaned in as he recounted his journey. "You've got quite the story," she said, handing him her business card. "Call me sometime. I'd love to help you get involved in some of our programs." By the end of the night, Jake had collected a handful of cards and more confidence than he had walked in with. Trump found him near the buffet table, a satisfied grin on his face. "How'd it go?" he asked. Jake held up the cards. "Better than I expected," he admitted, a surge of pride swelling within him. "Good," Trump said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is just the beginning. Jake, keep showing up, keep learning, and you'll go far." As Jake left the event that night, the city lights reflecting off the building's glass exterior, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping poverty or surviving. It was about building a future, one step at a time. For the first time in his life, Jake felt like he truly belonged in a world that had once seemed out of reach. Jake's new life was a whirlwind of opportunities, but it wasn't without its challenges. The private academy Trump had arranged for him was a stark contrast to the overcrowded public schools he'd attended. The students, with their neatly pressed uniforms and air of privilege, made Jake feel like a fish out of water. Whispers followed him through the hallways. "Isn't that the kid Trump helped out?" one boy muttered, loud enough for Jake to hear. Jake clenched his fists but kept his head down. He reminded himself why he was there: to learn, to grow, and to make the most of the second chance he'd been given. Lunchtime was particularly brutal. Jake often ate alone, his tray of food untouched as he listened to the chatter around him. He missed the simplicity of his old life, where the only battles he faced were against hunger and the cold. Now, he was fighting a different kind of war, a battle to prove that he belonged. The media attention didn't make things easier. Jake's story had made headlines, with articles praising Trump's generosity and Jake's act of honesty. While the attention brought some support, it also drew criticism. Online forums buzzed with debates. "Just a publicity stunt." One comment read, "Plenty of kids out there need help more than him." Jake tried to ignore the negativity, but the comments lingered in his mind, feeding his insecurities. Despite the challenges, Jake refused to give up. He threw himself into his studies, determined to prove his critics wrong. Mathematics, once a subject he had struggled with, became his favorite. He stayed after school for tutoring sessions and spent hours poring over textbooks at his desk. Slowly but surely, his grades began to improve. His teachers took notice. "You've got a real knack for this," his math teacher said one afternoon, handing back a test marked with a bold A. Jake smiled, the words giving him a much-needed boost of confidence. Outside of school, Jake immersed himself in every opportunity Trump extended, attending events and seminars where he absorbed knowledge like a sponge. At a business seminar, he listened with rapt attention as Trump addressed the audience about resilience. "Life is going to throw obstacles in your way," Trump said, his voice commanding the room's attention. "The question isn't whether you'll face challenges, it's whether you'll rise above them." Those words resonated deeply with Jake. He began to see his struggles not as roadblocks but as stepping stones. Each hardship was a lesson, each challenge a chance to grow stronger. With this mindset, Jake tackled life with a renewed sense of determination. One day, his perseverance bore fruit in an unexpected way. During a history class project, Jake was paired with Ethan, one of the school's most popular students. Initially, Ethan seemed disengaged, skeptical of Jake's abilities. But as they collaborated, Ethan was taken aback by Jake's sharp insights and tireless work ethic. "You know," Ethan said one afternoon as they finished their project, "you're not like what people say." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And what do people say?" Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "That you don't belong here. But I think they're wrong. You've got more grit than most kids in this school." The comment surprised Jake, but also gave him a sense of validation. Over time, Ethan became Jake's first real friend at the academy. And through him, Jake slowly built connections with other students. The whispers and stares didn't vanish entirely, but they became easier to ignore. Outside of school, Jake found solace in giving back. Inspired by his journey, he began volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, sharing his story with children who faced similar struggles. "I know what it feels like to think no one cares," he told them. "But trust me, things can change. You just have to keep going." This work gave Jake a profound sense of purpose. He realized his success wasn't just about himself. It was about using his platform to uplift others. As the months passed, Jake juggled school, volunteering, and the invaluable mentorship he received at Trump's events. The pieces of his once fragmented life began to come together. Challenges remained, but he met them with growing confidence. Guided by Trump's words, focus on your goals. Ignore the noise. Yet just as life seemed to settle into a rhythm, Jake faced a test that would challenge his integrity to the core. It began at a networking event hosted at one of Trump's luxury hotels. The room buzzed with energy, filled with some of the sharpest minds in business and finance. Jake moved cautiously through the crowd, observing and listening, though he still felt out of place among the polished professionals. He had learned to introduce himself and share his story with humility and pride. Toward the end of the evening, Jake found a quiet corner to reflect, sipping a soda and marveling at how far he'd come. That's when a man approached him, middle-aged, sharply dressed, and exuding an air of calculated charm. The man was one of the more vocal attendees, known for discussing a high-stakes real estate deal rumored to be worth millions. "You're Jake, right?" the man said, extending a hand. "I've heard a lot about you. Quite the story. Mind if I sit?" Jake nodded, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease as the man took a seat across from him. Their conversation started pleasantly. The man asked Jake about his experiences, his goals, and what he had learned from Trump. Jake answered honestly, grateful for the chance to share his journey. But then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Jake sat down next to Mr. Green, the crisp winter air carrying a faint chill. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just watching the pigeons flutter and peck at the crumbs scattered across the ground. Jake let the quiet settle over him, feeling the weight of memories and gratitude pressing on his chest. "You're a good kid," Mr. Green said finally, his voice soft but resolute. "Not many come back once they've made it out. Most people just move on, forget the faces they left behind." He paused, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "But not you. That says a lot." Jake smiled, his gaze fixed on the fountain ahead. "I could never forget. Mr. Green, I wouldn't have made it without your advice, without your kindness. You were there when I had nothing." Mr. Green chuckled, the sound scratchy yet warm. "All I ever gave you was a sandwich and some bad jokes. Kid, the rest? That was all you." Jake shook his head, emotion catching in his throat. "It wasn't just that. You reminded me that there were still good people in the world when I was losing hope. That's not something I'll ever take lightly." The old man leaned back, the smile never leaving his face. "Well, seems like you've turned out just fine. What brings you back to this old park anyway? Surely you've got better places to be." Jake glanced around, taking in the familiar sights, the bare trees, the cracked benches, the laughter of children in the distance. "This place, it's where I hit rock bottom, but it's also where I found something to hold on to. I guess I wanted to come back and pay it forward." Mr. Green raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "What's on your mind, kid?" Jake reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to the older man. Mr. Green hesitated before taking it, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the contents. Inside was a handwritten letter and several crisp bills, more money than he'd likely seen in years. "Jake, what's this?" Mr. Green asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a thank you," Jake said earnestly, "for all the times you helped me when you didn't have to, for being a friend when I didn't have anyone. And it's more than that. I want to start something, a program, maybe, for people like us. A way to help those who are struggling get back on their feet." Mr. Green stared at the envelope, his eyes misty. "You don't owe me anything, Jake. You don't owe anyone anything." Jake placed a hand on Mr. Green's shoulder, his grip firm yet gentle. "Maybe not, but I want to do this. I've been given so much, and I can't just keep it to myself. People need a chance, like I got. You always said it's not about where you start, but where you're headed." For a long moment, Mr. Green didn't say anything. He simply stared at Jake, his expression a mix of pride and disbelief. Finally, he nodded, a smile breaking through the lines of his face. "You're a good man, Jake. The world needs more people like you." Jake laughed softly, the sound tinged with both relief and determination. I'm just trying to do my part. As they sat together on the bench, talking and reminiscing, Jake felt something shift within him. He had come full circle, returning to the place where his story had nearly ended, only to begin again. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Jake knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. And that, he realized, was more valuable than anything money could buy. The two spent the afternoon catching up, their conversation flowing easily despite the time and distance that had passed. Jake shared stories of his new apartment, his school experiences, and the events he had attended since his life had taken its unexpected turn. Mr. Green listened intently, his expression a mixture of pride and wistfulness. In return, he told Jake about the others who still frequented the park, their struggles, their small victories, and the unrelenting challenges they faced daily. The conversation was a sobering reminder of the life Jake had left behind. Yet, it also sparked something in him, a sense of purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake felt a firm resolve take shape within him. "I want to help," he said, his voice steady and determined. "Not just you, but everyone. The people who are still out here struggling like I was. I don't know how yet, but I want to do something." Mr. Green's eyes softened, his smile warm. "You've already got the most important thing, Jake, a good heart. That'll take you far." The next day, inspired by their talk, Jake approached Trump with an idea. He wanted to organize a charity event to support the homeless community. Trump listened carefully as Jake laid out his vision, nodding with approval. "That's a great idea," Trump said, his tone encouraging. "And you're the perfect person to lead it. Let's make it happen." Over the following weeks, Jake poured his heart into planning the event. With Trump's guidance and connections, he secured a venue, sponsors, and a lineup of speakers who shared his passion for helping the less fortunate. Jake worked tirelessly, learning the intricacies of event coordination and fundraising while maintaining his focus on the goal, making a difference. On the night of the event, the venue buzzed with energy. Business leaders, philanthropists, and even some of Jake's old classmates gathered to support the cause. Jake stood backstage, his heart racing with anticipation. When the time came, he stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating him as he faced the crowd. Jake began his speech with quiet confidence. He spoke about his time in the park, the kindness he'd received from people like Mr. Green, and the life-changing opportunities Trump had given him. "I'm proof that one act of kindness can change a life," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "And together, we can do the same for so many others." The room erupted into applause. The event was a resounding success, raising tens of thousands of dollars for shelters, food programs, and job placement initiatives. Yet for Jake, the most meaningful moment came afterward. He approached Mr. Green with a check, enough to cover housing and medical expenses. The old man's hands trembled as he accepted it, his eyes brimming with tears. "You're a good kid," Mr. Green said, his voice thick with emotion. "Never forget that." As Jake left the venue that night, a profound sense of fulfillment washed over him. He knew his journey was far from over, but he also knew he was on the right path, one that allowed him to not only reshape his own future, but also give others the second chance he'd been fortunate to receive. Days later, Jake stood outside the Trump Organization's conference room, adjusting the tie he'd borrowed from a neighbor. Today was different. A new kind of challenge awaited him. Trump had invited him to shadow a high-stakes business meeting, an opportunity to observe the inner workings of a real estate empire. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, and the walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan. Jake felt both intimidated and exhilarated as he entered the room. "Glad you could join us, Jake," Trump said, motioning for him to take a seat. Jake sat down, eager to listen, observe, and learn. The meeting centered on a proposed luxury high-rise in one of Manhattan's most sought-after neighborhoods. As the discussion unfolded, Jake quickly realized that business wasn't just about numbers or contracts. It was about people. Trump navigated the room with precision, listening intently, challenging ideas, and steering the conversation toward actionable solutions. Jake was struck by his ability to balance assertiveness with collaboration, fostering an atmosphere where even the toughest feedback was welcomed. After the meeting, Trump pulled Jake aside. "What did you learn?" he asked. his tone expectant yet encouraging. Jake paused, collecting his thoughts. "It's not just about making decisions," he said slowly. "It's about listening, understanding what everyone brings to the table, and finding a way to make it work for everyone." Trump nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. Business is about creating value, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. If you can do that, Jake, you'll never fail." Donald Trump began involving Jake in various aspects of the business, giving him a front-row seat to the world of high-stakes deals and strategic thinking. He took Jake on site visits to construction projects, walked him through financial statements, and even allowed him to sit in on strategy sessions. Jake soaked up every lesson like a sponge, diligently scribbling notes in a small notebook he carried everywhere. Trump's mentorship wasn't just about teaching Jake how to succeed in business. It was about instilling a mindset, resilience, adaptability, and the importance of building meaningful relationships. One afternoon, Trump handed Jake a file containing details about a potential youth outreach initiative. "I want you to prepare a pitch," Trump said, his tone steady but challenging. "We're presenting this to a group of sponsors next week, and I want you to lead the presentation." Jake's heart raced as he stared at the file, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task. "Me? Are you sure?" he asked hesitantly. Trump placed a firm, reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you could do it. You've got what it takes, Jake. Now prove it." The following week was a whirlwind of preparation. Jake spent hours poring over research, drafting slides, and rehearsing his pitch in front of the mirror. He fine-tuned every detail, determined not to let Trump or himself down. On the day of the presentation, Jake stood before a room full of potential sponsors. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, but he took a deep breath and began. He spoke passionately about the importance of investing in the next generation, drawing from his own experience to illustrate the transformative power of opportunity. "I'm standing here today because someone believed in me," Jake said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Now, I want to pay it forward. Together, we can create a program that gives kids the tools they need to succeed, no matter where they come from." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Trump, who had been observing quietly from the back, gave him a subtle nod of approval. By the end of the day, they had secured funding far beyond their expectations, a testament to Jake's preparation and heartfelt delivery. As they rode the elevator back to Trump's office, Jake couldn't help but smile. "I didn't think I could do it," he admitted. Trump chuckled, his expression one of pride. "That's the thing about potential, Jake. You don't always see it in yourself, but once you start using it, there's no limit to what you can achieve." That evening, as Jake walked home beneath the twinkling city lights, he felt a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. He wasn't just a kid who had gotten lucky. He was someone learning, growing, and carving out a future he could be proud of. For the first time, Jake truly believed in himself, and he knew this was only the beginning.